All right. Hi, everyone. It is now 2 p.m. Welcome to our first public lecture in our new lecture series hosted by the Math3ma Institute, which is a new platform for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math here at the Masters University. I know most of you, but we have folks joining through live stream, and there's a little echo. So let me just say, my name is Danae Bradley. I'm a visiting professor of mathematics here at TMU and very happy to be your host for today. So before I introduce our speaker, let me give you a little bit of housekeeping. So we will have about a 50-minute talk followed by around 10 minutes of question and answer. We have folks joining us by live stream, so thank you everyone who's tuning in online. If you have a question during the talk, please feel free to post it in the chat box that you see next to the video. I will keep an eye on that chat box and I'm happy to pass those questions along to our speaker. We also have snacks in the back, so feel free to help yourself. If you're joining virtually, sorry, we hope you can make it in person next time. So I think that's all of the housekeeping. So let me now introduce our speaker for today. We are very happy to have Professor David Crater here. Most of you know who he is, but I want to give a little introduction for those who are joining us online as well. So Professor Crater is Associate Professor and Chair of Engineering and Computer Science here at the Masters University. He also works as a Senior Systems Engineer in Defense and Intelligence Satellite Systems. Professor Crater has extensive experience and background in both academia and industry, including a recent graduate degree from Harvard, which we'll hear more about today. And he's also been a huge supporter and champion for the Math3ma Institute and really helping us get off the ground. And so we're very grateful today for Professor Crater, and we're going to hear him speak on The Finger of God is Here, Biblical Studies in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. So thank you, Professor Crater, and welcome.
All right, am I on? Does that sound good? Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you, Danae, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks also to Dr. Bradley for organizing and promoting all the logistics associated with an event like this. We're very excited to hopefully make a regular series of academic lectures on this campus, kind of a new institution, if we're able to do that and have it be sort of a means of academic research level dialogue, including both students and faculty and the public at large, the interested and informed public at large that is interested in topics like this. So I think the best way for me to introduce my topic is to tell you how I got interested in artificial intelligence and how I think it's connected to biblical studies. I am interested in artificial intelligence, not primarily because it is allowing us to build systems that can even be called beings in our own image, okay? Intelligent agents, intelligent systems, robots in our own image that think like we do, that speak like we do, that process visual imagery and data like we do. I'm not primarily interested in AI because of that, although that is extremely interesting. And it illuminates, among many other things, the creation story, the Genesis creation story, how God made human beings, mankind, in his own image. What does that mean? I'm primarily interested in AI, though, because of the new avenues and outlets and windows that it provides into the Word of God and into God's nature himself. What I mean by that is natural language processing, which is the branch of AI interested in the processing of human language, both input language and creating language, so like robots that can speak and so on. Natural language processing is interesting, not only because we're linguistic beings, and we speak in language and we understand language, and much of our thought even is in language. We think in words. But so are angels. Angels are linguistic beings. You think about that. It's not just us that are linguistic beings, it's angels that are linguistic beings. The angels that fly around the divine throne in Isaiah 6, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Angels are linguistic. They speak and they hear. And they interact with humans at the level of language. And all that's true, of course, because God himself is a linguistic being. He speaks in language that human beings can understand, that's intelligible, and he even presents his revelation as being in word, right? The word of God created the earth. The word of God is inscripturated in the Old and New Testaments. The word of God is incarnated in the man Jesus Christ, who is the final word, we're told, the final word of revelation, so that there's no further revelation that can be given. All this is in the language of language. So that, to me, makes the process of understanding language and studying language and writing and creating systems that produce language and that understand language extremely, extremely interesting. All right. Now, in order to sort of set the foundation, you might say, for understanding how language works in such a way that we can create machines that can handle it, I need to give you some history as to what's been done in this field, because the history of this really goes back to the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century, and a famous computer scientist named Augustus de Morgan, who, if you're in my computer hardware class, you're very familiar with by now, because Augustus de Morgan created or outlined, didn't create them, outlined some of the most basic rules of computer science having to do with Boolean algebra and how you construct Boolean circuits that do digital things and perform complete digital processing. De Morgan said we ought to be able to do a quantitative analysis of language that will enable us to determine who wrote the Pauline epistles. Okay, and as you can probably tell, there's some skepticism even built into that research question, right? Because he seems to not have been sure who wrote the Pauline epistles. And since that day, there has been a steady sort of thread in the history of computational linguistics and the digital humanities, as these fields are often referred to, that is attempting to undermine sound biblical scholarship and biblical studies, and in turn, sound doctrine. And so another reason that I'm interested in these fields is to be able to provide an answer to that thread of history and to answer challenges to sound biblical scholarship and doctrine with an apologetic, if you will, that's informed by the latest technologies in AI and especially natural language processing. Does that make sense? So the history of this is extremely important, okay, is what I'm getting at. Here is some of the major dates that we are interested in. In 1851, De Morgan proposed a quantitative study of the epistles of Paul. In 1901, T.C. Mendenhall proposed and performed, he didn't just propose it, he performed a study of the Shakespearean canon, and I'll show you some pictures on that in just a minute, to attempt to decide who authored some of the disputed plays of Shakespeare. A lot of Shakespeare's plays are known to be legitimate, but there are others that are disputed as to whether Shakespeare actually wrote them. Digital analysis of language can provide conclusive answers to questions like that. And then there's 1935, Harvard scholar named George Ziff, who produced one of the most famous laws of the quantitative study of language, which I'll show you in just a minute, said that we investigate language in order to investigate the forces of the mind. We attempt to understand language quantitatively and rigorously and even computationally in order to be able to understand the forces of the mind. And I would add to that if we can understand the Word of God at that level, we can understand the forces in the divine mind. That's very motivating, okay? 1944, a guy named George Udney Ewell attempted to analyze the authorship of The Imitation of Christ using quantitative techniques. The Imitation of Christ is a famous Christian devotional classic, traditionally attributed to Thomas à Kempis, a Catholic monk, but occasionally to a contemporary of his in France named Jean Gerson. And Udney Ewell wanted to prove once and for all that Thomas à Kempis had or had not written The Imitation of Christ. By the way, this is, even though it was written by a Catholic monk, I have read this book to great benefit. And I think any Protestant can do the same if you really have an interest in being like Christ and in imitating Christ. 1949, Roberto Busa, I believe is how you pronounce his name, another Catholic, went to IBM in New York City, attempting to find systems and technologies that would help him analyze the total corpus of Thomas Aquinas's writings. He wanted to develop a concordance to Aquinas, a comprehensive concordance to Aquinas, like Strong's Concordance of the Bible, if you're familiar with that great classic resource tool that's been around since the end of the 19th century. And then in 1954, the Georgetown experiment demonstrated that you can translate human language by a machine automatically, in this case, from Russian to English. So in 1954, they translated about 10 sentences of Russian into English to great fanfare. So this produced a lot of interest and research funding and scholarly attention in the area of computational linguistics, and especially machine translation. They hit some walls after that, though, because neural networks had not yet become a thing. And it turns out, in order to do real expert level human translation of human language, you need neural networks. And I'll get into that a little more here in a few minutes. But in 1954, you had kind of a premonition of that. Like, machines can actually talk and understand language. A lot of excitement generated around that. So then, in 1962, the first, as far as I can find, the first computational analysis of a serious body of literature known as the Junius Letters, a group of political circulars that date from the Roman period, is what these were, was completed, analyzing the language and authorship of them. And then in 1964, the most important computational study that has ever been completed to date, I think it's fair to say, was completed by Mosteller and Wallace of the Federalist Papers. And Mosteller and Wallace investigated a historical question related to 12 Federalist Papers whose authorship had always been disputed. Some people thought Alexander Hamilton had written them. Other people thought that James Madison had written them. So Mosteller and Wallace, Mosteller was both of these guys were like heavy duty academic types. Mosteller was the chairman of the statistics department at Harvard. Wallace was, I think, the chairman of the statistics department at the University of Chicago. Both of these guys, well-known, reputable guys, published this book and said, without a doubt, James Madison wrote these 12 disputed papers that had been disputed for 180 years, by the way. So by the time these guys solved this problem, it had been a problem for 180 years. And were so convincing in the quantitative and computational analysis that they presented that the question was closed forever. Nobody today disputes who wrote those 12 papers. So the question is, how and why were they able to do that? Okay. Then in 1964, IBM hosted the Yorktown Heights Conference, which was the same year as Mosteller and Wallace published their book, and was, as far as I can tell, one of the first serious conferences on the digital analysis of language, the use of computers to begin to do rigorous analyses of language and literature. The journal Computers and the Humanities was first published in 1966. That is still published today. In fact, there's a group called the Association for computers and the humanities at ach.org that publishes this journal and is one of the major bodies today in the digital humanities. And then in 1970, the first Cambridge University conference in the UK on literary and linguistic computing. And from there, you kind of have an explosion of the field. So I stopped the history at 1970 because those are really the foundations that you need to know. And today the field is very diverse, lots of people in lots of places working on the digital analysis of language and literature, and including as it relates to the production of intelligent systems that can speak, hear, in some cases even write, produce literature. This is becoming increasingly common, and indeed increasingly every day, the sort of everyday thing that you read in the media and encounter increasingly in industry. Here is what I mean. Language has a mathematical structure, much like music. You know, music has, every musical note has a frequency, and that frequency is related to other frequencies, and some frequencies sound good together and other frequencies don't. So you have consonant chords and you have dissonant chords, and you try to avoid the dissonant ones and stay with the consonant ones, and you know, the nice sounding ones. The reason that is possible, and the reason language can be manipulated by computers and digital systems according to mathematical rules, is because the Lord has made language deeply mathematical. Look at this curve right here. This is a plot of the most frequent, most common English word, which is the, okay? The second most common English word, which is of, the third most common English word, which is and so on. That curve follows almost an exact exponential pattern. Okay? In fact, it's so close that nobody believes it's accidental. Okay, in fact, there's a lot of debate and discussion in scholarly circles about how this can possibly be. Okay, this data was taken from the novel Moby Dick. Okay, and not only is that true, that it follows an almost exponential curve, the frequency with which the word of appears in any sizable body of English is almost exactly half as the frequency with which the most frequent word occurs. So the occurs almost 14,000 times in Moby Dick. Of occurs almost 7,000 times. And the curve follows this rule, which is known as Zipf's law. The frequency of word ranked n, okay, is equal to the frequency of the most common word, in this case, the, divided by n. That's amazing. That's amazing that language follows that rule. Now, an exponential curve, for those of you who aren't mathematicians, if you take an exponential curve and you take a logarithm of both of the axes, the curve becomes approximately linear, okay? If the curve is exactly exponential in regular space, we'll call it, then it becomes exactly linear in log space. So that curve you see in the upper right is a logarithmic scale of the frequencies plotted in the upper left. Okay, it's highly linear. Now, this will vary somewhat based on the literature that's being analyzed. Moby Dick will not look exactly like a body of tweets taken from Twitter. Okay, but I'm about to show you some tweets from Twitter. Okay, and you will be amazed at the similarity. Now, before I show you that, let me just point out this to you down here in the bottom left. This is the frequency of word appearances in popular Christian songs. This scale here is hard to read, but the most popular word is Christmas. The second one is bells or bell. The third is jingle. The fourth is all, and the fifth is Santa, and so on. That curve is almost exactly exponential. Okay, when I say almost exactly, I mean it's statistical, so it's not exact. But its closeness to an exact exponential curve is striking. And everyone has commented on it. Like I said, everyone who studied it has said, wow, how can that possibly be? That language follows that regular of a pattern. Let me show you some more. Here is words taken from 5 million tweets in 2011. Look at that curve there. It so happens on Twitter, people are very self-absorbed, and the most common word is the word I, the first person pronoun I. Okay, and only second to I does thee come. Okay, look at that. Look how regular that is. And then here's the log plot of it, almost perfectly linear. Look at this. Same tweets, and the pattern holds even at a sub-word level. So look at the pattern on individual letters in 5 million tweets taken from Twitter. Look how regular that is. And that. This is two letters, bigrams, okay, sometimes called. This is single letters. So the patterns we're talking about hold not only at the word level, they hold at the sub-word individual character level. Now, that pattern is not the only pattern that arises in language. Look at this pattern of word length taken from the same body of 5 million tweets. That is an almost perfect Gaussian distribution, if you know terms in probability and statistics. Okay, it looks like a bell curve, looks like a bell. With the average word length being around 5, 4, somewhere between 4 and 5. 5 is the most common length. And then from there, they fall off in both directions, almost according to a perfect Gaussian curve. That's amazing. Now in tweets tend to be shorter words. So if this whole thing is skewed towards the short side. If you were to take Moby Dick, the average would be much further to the right, but the pattern would be the same. Now, why these patterns are important is because you can train a machine to know these patterns and to pick words and understand words accordingly and to sense connections between words that tend to occur together and other words that tend to never occur together and to discern their meanings thereby. So in other words, this regularity that's built into language, I would even say almost looks as if it was intended that we should build systems that are linguistic. It seems to me in studying this that part of the providential plan for history included a plan that human beings build systems that are linguistic in our own image. That's a deep well there, so I'll leave you with that to ponder as you see fit. It seems very much to me that the whole movement of artificial intelligence and the creation of intelligent machines is clearly an intent in the providential flow of history. That's the best way I can put it. Okay. Now, if the second coming, the second coming and the rapture, as we heard in our faculty meeting this morning, happens next week, I'll turn out to be wrong about that, right? Because this is going to take some time. It's not going to happen next week. It's not like we're on the verge of, intelligent systems everywhere. But they are proliferating, as you can tell just from the media, right? All the buzz about AI and intelligent systems. And this is the reason why. All right, here is one of Zipf's original charts. What this shows is a plot, a logarithmic plot. Okay, the reason the lines are kind of skewed like this is because the scales are logarithmic. It's a logarithmic plot of the number of words against the number of occurrences that number of words has. Okay, so like Number one here looks to me like there's 4 different values there. So there's 4 different values on the frequency chart that only one word occurred with each of those 4 frequencies. Does that make sense? Okay, and then there's this number. Okay, it looks like another 4 there that represent the frequencies with which 2 numbers occurred. I'm sorry, 2 words occurred, not 2 numbers. So there's 2 words that occurred with these 4 frequencies. There's 1 word that occurred with these 4 frequencies, and so on. Okay, look how almost perfectly linear that plot is. And this is not English, this is Chinese. So the pattern, here's the punchline. The pattern is, or the reality is, these patterns arise not just in English, in every single language. Every single language. Here's English, same analysis that Zipf did. And by the way, this was 1935. He didn't do this with computers. He did this by hand, painstakingly by hand, and it took him decades to do it. Here's his plot of Latin. Okay, he calls it Plautine Latin, okay, after the Roman playwright named Plautus. You're familiar with Roman literature. Maybe Dr. Horner will, if he sees this later, he told me he was going to watch this, so maybe if he sees it later, he can educate us on who Plautus was. But look at the pattern of Latin. It's almost identical to English and German. I'm sorry, English and Chinese. Here, I think I've got one on, here's an overlay of English and Latin, plotting the rank of frequency words. So that number 1 is the most frequent word, number 2 is the second most frequent, number 3 is the most frequent, and so on, for both English and Latin against their frequencies. You have some breakdown in the comparison up here at the most frequent words because of the nature of Latin versus English, right? The definite article, the indefinite article tend to occur in different patterns in Latin than they do in English. But for most of the spectrum, you have almost exact overlay. I mean, it's exact. Okay, there's even places here where you can't see the dotted line because the bold line is right on top of it. So this is Zipf going, what in the world is going on with this? What does this mean? Here is Zipf's plot of Chinese syllables. So the pattern holds not just at words, not just at individual letters, but at syllables. Okay, the plot of Chinese syllables is almost exactly linear. He's got the dotted line here is the pattern of Chinese words. The bold line and the dots that the bold line shows the trend for are Chinese syllables. Okay, so sub-word phonemes. The word phoneme is the fancy name for a syllable. Phoneme. Okay, here's French broken down according to stem. So the words like the word running and the word ran would both have the same stem, run, right? So he broke down French words like that into their lexical units, and he plotted the lexical units in a large body of French literature. The pattern is almost identical. So this exponential pattern, linear log pattern, appears in language at the word level, at the individual character level, at the bigram level, at the syllable level for every language. Okay, this is what we mean when we say language is deeply mathematical. Now, in addition to the primary statistics that you can derive just from counting word frequencies, as Zipf did, you can also generate sophisticated derivative parameters. Zipf had this thing called the degree of inflection, one of the earliest derivative parameters there was. And on that chart I just showed you, you can calculate the degree of inflection by what the formula of the line is that connects the dots. Okay, there's some math and some parameters involved there, and you can measure how highly inflected or how little inflected a language is. English is a lightly inflected language, whereas German or Hebrew, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, is highly inflected. That means roots are changed in their form based on their meaning and their function in a sentence. Okay, it's highly inflected. The words are inflected. They change their form based on how they function in a sentence. Okay, George Udney Ewell had a similar parameter in his 1944 book that I pointed out to you in the first early timeline, that he called the K characteristic, which he developed because he noticed that his studies of language were affected by the length of his text samples. And he wanted to remove that element of text length, right? If I'm studying something for authorship to try to decide who wrote it, the language that I study, or my methods of analyzing the language, should not be dependent on how long the text is. If you wrote the document, I should be able to see that. I should be able to see your authorial fingerprint in the language, regardless of how long the text sample is. So his K characteristic eliminated text length as a variable in his analyses. Then an Australian scholar named John Burroughs in 2002 did the same thing with what he called his delta parameter and demonstrated authorship attribution success rates above 90%. So unknown pieces of literature could be correctly attributed to their authors over 90% of the time using the delta parameter. And an American scholar at NYU named David Hoover improved on that in a parameter he called delta prime in 2004. So there's a lot of effort being made still today in natural language processing and computational linguistics to develop the most meaningful and powerful parameters for a variety of literary and linguistic analysis methods. Okay. Now, here is the promised chart I told you I'd show you about a disputed play called Coriolanus that may or may not have been written by Shakespeare. Okay, this analysis was performed by two guys named Craig and Kinney, who wrote a whole book on the analysis of the Shakespearean canon. What they did was they used what's called a lexical words test, which is a plot of the words that Shakespeare is known to use more commonly than others against words that others use more commonly than Shakespeare. Okay, so Shakespeare has a certain body of words that he likes to use and certain body of words he almost never uses, and that other authors use much more commonly. Okay, when they plot these two dimensions against each other, you see the light squares in the background here are the Shakespearean works of known Shakespearean authorship, and the dark dots are the works of known non-Shakespearean authorship. And then you plot Coriolanus on top of that, and you see very clearly who wrote Coriolanus. Coriolanus is clearly a Shakespearean work. Has Shakespeare's vocabulary all over it. And this is, you can see how definitive this is. I mean, how are you going to argue with that, right? There's no bias here. The math is not biased, it's just math. Okay, we analyze the frequency of Shakespeare's words against others and then put Coriolanus on top of it. It clearly shows up in Shakespeare's body of work. Okay, we can do the same thing with the Wizard of Oz. Now, this is a different mathematical technique called PCA, principal component analysis, that just has to do with reducing high dimensional data down to the two most significant dimensions, and then plotting those two dimensions against each other. You can see the works of two authors clearly distinguished in the two dimensions. The author of The Wizard of Oz was a guy named L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum. When Baum died, the Oz works were so popular and so lucrative for the publisher that the publisher wanted to continue them. And the publisher hired a woman named Ruth Plumley Thompson, who apparently had a relationship with Baum, and Baum had maybe designated her as the sort of heir apparent of the Oz empire, if you will. And so the publisher said, Ms. Thompson, can you continue the Oz works, make them as much like the original works as you can? So there arose a question after Baum died as to whether some of the works that had Thompson's name on them were actually Baum's work that she had just sort of refashioned and reformatted, but it was Baum's writing, or whether they were Thompson's own original writing. So this analysis was done by a scholar at Emory University named Jose Benongo. I think he's still at Emory in the Department of Biostatistics. He's doing mainly statistics associated with biology. But he did an analysis here showing that, if you notice on this chart, a work that is known to be by Thompson called The Wizard of Way Up, okay, right here, as demonstrated by that heart symbol right there, is all on the Thompson side of the scale. Okay, see those hearts scattered around the small empty dots? While all of Baum's works, which have the dark symbols over here, are all over here with the rest of Baum's work as we would expect. Okay, so basically Benongo is trying to settle the question, which works did Baum write and which works did Thompson write? Here's another example of this. This time Baum is on the left because the Royal Book of Oz is known to be by Thompson, and it appears over here with all of Thompson's other works. And the work Glinda of Oz is known to be by Ruth Plumley Thompson. Look at that, appears right in the middle of Thompson's known works. So these mathematical methods end up being very, very definitive, is the point here. Okay, let's see, I think I've got one or two more of these. No, I don't. Okay, let's talk about the Bible. That was all sort of background to how you do digital analysis of literature and language. What's been done on the Bible in this vein? I mentioned already De Morgan's 19th century proposal, which he never carried out. It was just kind of an idea of studying the Pauline epistles from the standpoint of quantitative linguistics. Here's what else has happened. As far as I can find, and as far as some other scholars have confirmed, there's only really been 7 major studies of the Bible along these lines. The first was by a Jewish scholar named Raday and a Mormon named Rencher, who's at Brigham Young University in 1973 on the book of Isaiah. And you can see a lot of interest is centered around the book of Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah there, Isaiah there, Isaiah there, in 73 and 74, because Isaiah is in conventional mainstream scholarship believed to be by 2 authors. So the dual authorship theory of Isaiah has to do with the fact that the first 39 chapters of Isaiah are very different from the last 27 chapters. 40 through 66 has a lot of prophecy that the first part of the book doesn't have. So a lot of people have said, there's no way Isaiah could have known all those things he predicted at the end of the book. And so it must have been by someone who came later than Isaiah, after the Babylonians and the Persians and everything that Isaiah predicted, okay, at the end of his book. Raday also joined another guy named Wickman to study Zechariah in 1975. You had another scholar do some work on the Pauline epistles in 78. And then here's a key point, key event that happened in the early 1980s. Raday wrote a book on the very definitive thing on the analysis of the language of Genesis. And here's what the New York Times said about it. Raday's 5-year linguistic analysis of Genesis, of the 20,000 words of Genesis, indicated an 82% probability it was written by one author. This contradicts the documentary hypothesis. The documentary hypothesis being the theory that Moses did not write the Pentateuch. Okay, and Raday was saying, this looks like one guy wrote Genesis at least, right? So this is an illustration of what I was saying earlier about the apologetic value of digital methods. Because we can do these sorts of digital analyses and say, yeah, there are differences between the 2 halves of Isaiah, but look at all this data. There's, from these other works that also have differences in various parts. There's no reason Isaiah couldn't have written, the prophet Isaiah could not have written both parts of the book. There's no reason Moses couldn't have written in, different styles and on different topics in the book of Genesis and the other books of the Torah or the Pentateuch. Okay, so a lot of this has apologetic value. Apologetics is one of the main areas I see this sort of line of scholarship being used in the future. Here is an analysis by a group at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 1997. These guys analyzed 3 books of the Old Testament. As far as I'm aware, these are the only digital analyses of these 3 books. Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, also known as the Song of Songs, and the book of Daniel. And you note from this how Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and part of Daniel are clustered pretty closely together. But then you have some outlying chapters here from Daniel. You know why that is? Because part of Daniel is written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. So differences of language create different quantitative parameters. I showed you a lot of quantitative graphs that show similarities across languages, but there are also impacts of language difference in various types of quantitative analysis, and you have to control your experiments for differences in language. Okay, so the main point here to me is how closely aligned those books that are all written in Hebrew appear to be. Okay, and look at most of mainstream scholarship does not believe that Solomon wrote the books traditionally attributed to him. But look how closely together, Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes are. I mean, it's not definitive by itself, but that certainly lends support to the idea of a single author of both books. Okay, I'm running out of time here, so I got to hustle. Just to be fun, just to have some fun with this, I threw some of my own writings into the experimental mix. All right, what I've got here are 3 graduate school essays of mine, combined with English translations of Ecclesiastes and the Song of Songs. Okay, those are my 3 essays. Okay, here are the other 2 books, which I obviously did not write. Okay, look down here at how closely here they're by complete works. Here they're by individual chapters. Look how closely together inside that circle the chapters of my writings are. Okay, and then you've got Brenton Ecclesiastes down here, and it's hard to see the yellow dots, but you got Brenton's Song of Songs up there. Clear clustering according to authorship, okay, according to literary source, you might say. Okay, and I think I got one more. Here I added some additional documents, a couple of poems I wrote back in the day, including breaking those down by chapter. And you can see how my writings still cluster together here and here. And when I add the poems are almost right on top of each other, right next to my other writings. Now, it's interesting down here, you got a couple of outliers, which are Ecclesiastes Chapter 3. If you remember, Ecclesiastes 3 has that great poem, "For everything there's a season," right? There's a time to mourn, there's a time to laugh, a time to die, a time to make war, and a time to make peace, all this kind of stuff. Very unique in the whole body of Ecclesiastes. And so you have, according to this analysis, using 6 grams, which is groups of 6 letters together, that difference shows up, which is interesting. The level of granularity of your analysis has, that choice of granularity has a big impact on the results. Okay, last thing, before I show you the neural network. Here's what's happened since 2001 as neural networks have begun to take over this kind of quantitative analysis of language. In 2001, you had the first neural network language models. In 2006, Google Translate came out. In 2013, you had the first word embeddings. Word embeddings are numerical encodings for words that are used in natural language processing pipelines. In 2015, you had the first use of what's known as attention in NLP neural networks. That is the use of a very human-like mechanism for distinguishing between which words are related to which ones and which ones aren't. Okay, this was a breakthrough in especially machine translation, and it enables the kind of machine translation I'm about to show you. In 2016, Google Translate moved to a neural network model. It had been purely statistical before that. 2017, you had the transformer neural network model, which is the model I'm about to show you, that has revolutionized the field and enabled expert level translation of human language. 2018, you had some follow-on results from the transformer. BERT here stands for bidirectional encoder representations from transformers, okay, which is a mouthful, I know, but it's downstream from the transformer and generates new language encodings based on the transformer's architecture. In 2020, just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, Google Translate moved to a partial transformer model. And what I'm about to show you, I claim, is the first application of a dedicated transformer to the Hebrew language. Okay, so fasten your seatbelts for this. Okay, I'm going to stop the share over here, and I'm going to start the share over here on my laptop. And I will have to make this quick because we're running out of time. What I have here is the code for a neural network. Okay, the neural network has been trained on Hebrew that looks like that. Okay, let me make that bigger. How's that? Is that better? Okay, this Hebrew I got from movie subtitles. Okay, this is popular modern Hebrew from movie subtitles. That's what I'm going to train this transformer neural network on. Okay, it's got corresponding English sentences. Okay, so it's English, it's Hebrew English pairs that the transformer is going to look at. And it's going to learn Hebrew in it already learned Hebrew because I trained it yesterday in an hour and a half. Okay, it learned Hebrew to, I would say, like a teenager's level in an hour and a half. Okay, that's the kind of technology that we're talking about here. I use 900,000 sentence pairs, which is not very large in terms of neural network training data. It is typical, expert level neural networks today that can translate human language have millions of training sentences, tens of millions, sometimes even hundreds of millions. Okay, the combined sentence pairs look like this. Okay, so you can see the kind of language here. It's just sort of movie subtitle, very loose punctuation, loose grammar. Okay, and there's 900,000 of these. The neural network, which, by the way, for those of you who are interested in the computing setup here, is running on an Amazon virtual machine in the Amazon cloud. My front end here, which you're looking at, is in the Google cloud, and the Google cloud is talking to the Amazon cloud through my laptop right here. That's what's happening. Got the front end in the Google cloud, the back end in the Amazon cloud. The back end has a GPU, so it's very high powered, which enabled me to do a training on 900,000 sentences in an hour and a half. If I had less powerful hardware, it would have taken much longer than that. Let me show you what happens here. Okay, you're about to see the machine translate 10 sentences before your eyes, and this will happen pretty fast, and then I'll explain to you what happened so that everything's clear. Okay, let's watch right here, and let's go up here and say runtime, run after. It's going to take about 15 seconds to get its mind about it, and then it will start spitting out Hebrew sentences if everything goes according to plan. Okay, this technology can be impressive and it can be a curse, right? And I'm going to compare the translations to Google Translate, so you have a sense of the quality that this thing is producing. There it goes. It's cranking out Hebrew translations, one at a time. There's only about 10 of them. Now Google Translate is cranking out its translations. Okay, at the bottom, Google's translation scores get a 41.7% Meteor score. A Meteor score is a standard industry measure of translation quality. The Hebrew Transformer gets a 46.9%, so the Hebrew Transformer beats Google Translate. Okay, now, just to give you a final piece of information here, and just to wow you a little bit. Let's put a Bible verse in here and say something like, "Holy, holy, holy is our God of hosts." Okay, I'm on Google Translate right now. The Hebrew looks like this according to Google Translate. I'm going to copy the Hebrew, then I'm going to go back to my neural network, copy the Hebrew in here, and then see how the neural network translates the Hebrew. It says, "Holy, holy is our God of armies." Not bad. Host means armies, right? The God of hosts means that God has armies. And they're not armies of humans, by the way, they're armies of angels. God of hosts, he has hosts of angels in his armies. So, final takeaway, this is a very early stage in this kind of research that I'm working on, and Lord willing, in the future, what I plan to do is train neural networks thoroughly in the Bible. So you have sort of a Bible bot that is able to do things like answer questions, provide aid in biblical studies. Okay, you have a difficult passage that you're not sure what the translation is. You ask the Hebrew bot what the translation is. It's trained on biblical Hebrew, maybe rabbinic Hebrew, and as much Hebrew as we can find to train it on, and see what it says. And it's an additional, very meaningful, valuable input into the process that pastors and teachers and seminary professors and individual Christians who are interested in tech savvy are able to use in their understanding of the Word of God and the nature of God and the actions of the mind of God, which is what the Word of God reveals. Thank you very much. You guys have been very good audience.
Thank you, Professor Crater. That was superb. Excellent. We have time for the question and answers. So let me just say, if you are joining us by live stream, please feel free to put your question in the chat. We have one there. But while virtual folks are uploading their questions, let's open it to the floor here. So any questions for Professor Crater?
Uh-oh, I'm scared. Dr. Kim, you're going to ask me a question I can't answer.
I got a few, but at the very beginning, you showed us statistical distribution of how a lot of things fit the exponential.
Yes.
That was off of written language. Is that correct? So
that is correct, yes.
What about drawn languages?
Drawn languages?
So things like hieroglyphics and Egyptian times and things like that. Has anyone?
Well, I mean, Chinese is pictograms. I showed you that, right? My guess is, I haven't seen Egyptian, but my guess is it would follow the exact same pattern.
But you wouldn't think it, I guess the reason why I'm asking is hieroglyphics pretty much died off. Would it be because it didn't follow this pattern? Or might that be a reason? And this is just how our minds are trained to think? Or would that be too much of a stretch in terms of implying that statistical analysis?
I'm not a historian of language or a linguist or anything, but my gut is that the reason those languages died off didn't have to do with the fact that they didn't follow patterns. I think they probably followed the exact same patterns, and they died off because of larger factors like military conquests and the things that cause empires to decline and disappear and that sort of stuff. Again, I'm not an authority on that subject, but that's my own sense of it. Follow up?
Yeah, well, completely different thing. So in terms of when you're doing the authorial discovery or whatever that's called.
Yes, authorship attribution.
Yeah, authorship attribution.
Yes. There's Shakespeare.
So has people done like an age progression? because people's writing styles change when you're infant.
Yeah, good.
Is that able to detect?
Good point. The short answer is yes. As far as I'm aware, there's not a whole lot of digital work that's been done on like the progression of Frank Baum's writings in the Oz novels. You could do a very interesting thing on like Solomon. The book of Proverbs is mostly, if not entirely, from Solomon's younger years, whereas Ecclesiastes is from his later years. You could see a very interesting authorial progression there in a biblical sense. So my short answer is yes, that would definitely be detectable digitally, quantitatively, but I don't know that a whole lot of work has been done on that yet. Other questions?
We have a question from the internet. Were these analyses of scripture's language completed on the original text or English translation? I think these analyses might refer to Isaiah, Genesis, and/or comparisons with your essays.
Yes, these analyses were done on the original Hebrew, original meaning the Masoretic text, if you know that phrase. The Masoretes are the group of Jewish scribes that produced the text of the Hebrew Bible that we have today. The earliest extant manuscript in the Masoretic tradition is not very old. It's from like the 8th or 9th century AD. But it's the received text. It's what Jews believe to be the original, the most authoritative, and it's what all of our English Bibles are translated from. Radé is Jewish, a native speaker of Hebrew, and of course did his analyses on the original Hebrew. My analyses that, these analyses here by the University of Maryland, Baltimore County people were on English translations. Okay, I believe, not 100% sure of that. These are 3 American scholars, and I don't have any reason to believe that they would know Hebrew. Let's see, were there others? No, that was it. So short answer is the biblical scholarship here that I mentioned were all on the original languages. Morton on Paul was done, actually that might have been in English, not in Greek. Obviously Paul wrote in Greek. So I think that answers the question.
Great. Other questions here?
Well, I just wondered, authors or speakers will change their presentation depending on the audience, the sophistication of the audience.
Yeah.
So how would you measure that? If Paul writing a letter to a congregation? It's
a question. It's a good question. An author can not only change his or her style based on intended audience, but can change subject matter, can change genre, right? Like what if Paul wasn't writing prose, he was writing poetry, right? Or what if he wasn't writing in Greek, he also knew Hebrew, he could have written Hebrew as well. However, at the same time, there are aspects of an author's writing that he or she is not even conscious of and cannot control. And those can be detected by digital methods. So if Paul wrote a thing, he would not be able to hide all of the authorship fingerprints on that work, even if he wanted to. And that's true across genre, across topic matter, across intended audience, and all those sorts of things that authors tend to adjust their writing for. So the short answer is it has to be controlled. You have to take those factors into account. I showed you a little bit in some of these charts I showed you, but it's also possible to detect authorship across time, across genre, across subject matter, and even across intended audience, because you just can. I mean, it's the nature of language. There are certain things I do in language that I'm not even aware of, that I just always do, and I can't help myself. It's that kind of thing. Oh,
so with that, off that, given that we have enough data, would we be able to, figure out who wrote Hebrews?
In order to make an authorship attribution, you have to have a test body of known authorship from every possible author. So the alleged or the proposed authors of Hebrews, other than Paul, to my knowledge, have tended to be people like Barnabas, some of the other New Testament figures, some of the other apostles, right? You would have to have a body of known authorship from those people to use as the reference. And then you compare Hebrews to each one of those and see which one it aligns with. As far as I'm aware, we have no other writings from Barnabas. There's some apocryphal stuff in the early church period that is allegedly from Barnabas, but even that's debated. So, that's a tough issue.
You don't think we have enough?
I don't think there's enough data.
Okay, we're 1 minute over, but we have one more question from our virtual audience.
Bring it on.
We saw this awesome demo comparing your transformer to Google Translate.
Mhm.
Now, until the world has access to your code, what do you recommend for basic Greek and Hebrew translations? What do you think is a good tool for that?
For like Bible study? There are and have been digital software tools out there for years. Like there's Logos Bible software, there's Accordance Bible software, there's another major one whose name is escaping me. I have it at home. That you can use to study the original languages. You have the original language in one column and you have the English translation in another. You can hover your mouse over the original language and it'll tell you like what part of speech it is and what the root form is and all this kind of stuff. So that is what I would recommend for biblical studies. Get one of those software packages that cost, they're not expensive, super expensive, couple $100. We're not yet to the point where neural networks for any kind of major literary study are going to be widely available. But we're moving in that direction where they will be built, commercialized, optimized, and sold, where you can go to the store and buy a neural network for this language or that language or what have you. And of course, there's also Google Translate, which is not perfect, but does pretty darn well. And Microsoft has an analogous service. There's a couple other big language translation services that are out there and available, all of which can help someone make sense of a biblical language or otherwise that they're not currently familiar with.
Okay, excellent. And if we want to learn more, there's a new AI emphasis here.
Yes. My colleague, Dr. Eichmeyer, and I have started a new artificial intelligence emphasis in the computer science program here at the Masters University. We welcome any and all comers. We will teach you some of these techniques in natural language processing, as well as in computer vision and in machine learning. Okay, so you will learn the 3 major subfields of artificial intelligence on the way to your world-class Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from the Masters University.
Excellent. All right, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you very much.
Stop is in this room, Friday, March 4th, 2 p.m. We are very happy to have Dr. Abner Chow, who will be doing a question and answer on reclaiming the rightful place of theology and the doctrine of creation in the sciences. You will not want to miss that. It will also be live streamed. And for more information, anyone who's joining us online, you can visit us at masters.edu/lectures. All the info is there. Okay, thank you. Please don't pass those back.